Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Molly Hardy, a program officer from the Division of Preservation and Access. And here with me today is John Cox, also from NEH and from the Office of Challenge Grants. This presentation is designed to introduce you to the National Endowment for the Humanities. There we go. This presentation is designed to introduce you to the National Endowment for the Humanities and to the grant opportunities we have available to you. We will focus on NEH's support for infrastructure projects, highlighting opportunity-specific funding that might help to preserve, protect, and sustain the unique historical buildings and archival collections at historically Black colleges and universities. Such buildings and collections can both highlight the unique history and character of these colleges and universities, and can also function as easy, recognizable symbols of an institution as a whole. So, to get us started, let me please explain a little bit about the NEH. We are a federal agency founded in 1965 to support all areas of the humanities through project-based grants and fellowships using merit-based peer review. Some important parts of this definition. First, as a federal agency, the NEH uses taxpayer money and has a responsibility to make sure that money is spent wisely. We support projects and activities of national impact in all U.S. states and territories. As a federal agency, we also support the humanities at the state level. As mandated by Congress, 40% of the agency's budget supports the state and jurisdictional humanities councils. These councils increase public awareness of access to and support for the humanities all across the United States. They play a critical role in supporting NEH's mission and goals at a local grassroots level. So in addition to the grant programs we'll be talking about today, I encourage you to see what opportunities your state or jurisdictional councils have as well. All of our grant making is project-based. This means you need to define what you want to do. Some of the grants are for large projects, others for smaller ones, but all of the grants are evaluated based on the project itself, rather than the reputation of the applicant, either the individual or institutions. You must prove yourself anew with each application. We use merit-based peer review to evaluate all applications. Peer review is at the heart of our process. NEH tries to make that process as transparent as possible. We publish review criteria for each grant, and we ensure that reviewers stick to these criteria in their evaluations. We do maintain reviewers and applicants' privacy, but all applicants are entitled to feedback. So whether or not your application is funded, we encourage you to ask for reviewers' comments. It's quite common for an application not to be successful for the first time, but to be awarded on a second or third try. Many applicants find reviewers' feedback useful when revising their applications. We are always looking for experts to serve on our review panels, and I'm posting now in the chat a link if you would ever like to consider being a panelist. You can sign up there, and then we would know to contact you. Finally, the NEH makes grants in all areas of the humanities and welcomes inter or multidisciplinary work. Activities are addressed to different audiences, from the general public to school children and scholars. And NEH grants go to nonprofit institutions such as museums, archives, libraries, colleges and universities, public television and radio stations, as well as individual scholars. Different groups might be eligible for different grants, but all the projects are based in the humanities. We do not support the creative arts, that's the NEA, and we don't support humanitarian work either. So with these caveats, we work with a wide definition of the humanities. The NEH founding legislation defined the humanities as including, but not limited to, quote, the study and interpretation of languages, both modern and classic, linguistic, literature, history, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology, comparative religion, ethics, the history, criticism, and theory of art, end quote. We also support projects in fields like anthropology and sociology, so long as they employ humanistic methods. So really, if you can make a case that your project is in the humanities, we encourage you to apply. And as we will be emphasizing throughout our presentation, you can always talk to a program officer if you have questions. But at this point, you might be asking yourself, what does it have to do? Does this have to do with buildings on my campus, with renovating and sustaining the cultural assets on my campus? At NEH, we understand infrastructure as vital to the work of the humanities. Historical assets can, we know, place large financial demands on institutions such as HBCUs seeking to maintain, update, and renovate century-old buildings and preserve and safeguard fragile archival collections. John and I will now introduce you to some of these opportunities, first from the Division of Preservation and Access, and then from the Office of Challenge Programs. So the Division of Preservation and Access. A substantial portion of the nation's cultural heritage and intellectual legacy is held in libraries, archives, and museums, and many of these exist on college and university campuses. These repositories have a great challenge to preserve diverse formats of materials that are threatened by factors inherent in their physical structure or by the environments in which they are housed, and to create a level of intellectual control sufficient to enable users to find and use the materials relevant to them. Increasingly, these humanities collections are being used to create the kind of web-based resources that NEH also supports, such as encyclopedias, dictionaries, descriptive catalogs, and digital archives. Both the creators and the users of these resources also need our support to develop digital tools to enhance access to and promote integration of these materials. So the Division of Preservation and Access grant programs recognize that good stewardship of cultural resources requires equal attention to both preservation and access. All of the division's programs focus on ensuring the long-term and wide availability of primary resources in the humanities. So today I'm going to walk you through two of these programs. First, Preservation Assistance Grants, or PAGs as we often call them, are designed to cover a wide range of needs to encourage repeat applications and to support a combination of activities. We recognize that in some organizations, implementing preservation needs happens incrementally. So this program is designed to cover a wide range of needs that can be bundled together. In the last 20 years, this program has funded over 2,000 projects. The funding limit for any combinations of these activities is $10,000, with up to $15,000 for projects that involve consultation and planning for the 250th anniversary of American independence. And I'd be really happy to say more about that initiative in the Q&A. Cost sharing is not required in this program, and your project may take up to 18 months to complete, beginning as early as September 1st in the year that you apply. At its heart, the point of the preservation assistance grants are to enable small and mid-sized organizations to bring in outside experts in conservation and preservation to provide advice and build capacity. If your organization has not had a general preservation needs assessment, that's a good place to start and can help establish priorities moving forward. You'll want to identify a consultant whose preservation skills and expertise are related to the types of collections that are the focus of your project. Second, you may have identified a specific issue in the preservation of your collections and desire a focused consultation with a preservation professional. These more specific needs might include the care of digital collections, establishing environmental monitoring programs, emerging preparedness, and including for continuity of operations and item-level conservation surveys. Third, if a consultant has recommended that your organization would benefit from preservation supplies such as acid-free storage boxes, archival photo shelves, archival shelving, or environmental monitoring equipment such as data loggers or light meters, then you may request funds to purchase these. Fourth, PAGs support professional development for staff and volunteers who work with cultural heritage collections. Education and training can be in preservation topics, such as the handling and storage of collections, or topics that support enhanced access, such as the best practices for cataloging or for digitization. Training may take place in person or virtually. Furthermore, if your organization is located within a federally declared disaster area, you may request funding to support further recovery efforts related to your collection. For instance, this is the only situation under which the PAG program funds conservation treatment work. If this applies to you, please review the notice of funding opportunity carefully and contact us with any specific questions. And you may combine any of these activities, for instance, hiring a consultant for a preservation assessment and purchasing recommended supplies, or purchasing supplies for rehousing and bringing them in, and then bringing in a consultant to educate staff and volunteers on best practices for storage, handling, and display. The NEH awarded a preservation assistance grant to Southern University at Shreveport for a comprehensive assessment for proper long-term preservation of its Black ethnic archives. These collections, which focus on Louisiana history, include the complete run of the Shreveport Sun, the oldest African-American newspaper in Louisiana, started in 1927. The collections also include materials on notable African Americans in Shreveport, illuminating lives that included illuminating lives that included both professional and community activities. The papers of local activists who work with national leaders such as Dr. King to rally local support provide tremendous insights into the grassroots elements of the civil rights movement. Both the Sun archives and the archival collections also round out the picture of everyday life and community activity during the civil rights era. The second program that I'd like to introduce you to today from the Division of Preservation and Access is the Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections Grants. This program helps cultural institutions meet the complex challenge of preserving large and diverse holdings of humanities materials for future generations by supporting sustainable conservation measures that mitigate deterioration, prolong the useful life of collections, and support institutional resiliency, the ability to anticipate and respond to disasters resulting from natural or human activity. Cultural heritage institutions can accomplish the work of preservation most effectively through preventative conservation. Preventative conservation encompasses managing relative humidity, temperature, light, and pollution in collection spaces, providing protective storage enclosures and systems for collections, and safeguarding collections from theft, fire, floods, and other disasters. Such work requires an interdisciplinary team of conservators, architects, engineers, facilities managers, curators, directors, and other staff. Establishing such collaborations are key to the success of an SCHC application. Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections Awards come at two levels. The first is a planning grant for up to $50,000 and can take up to 2 years to complete. Examples of activities that these awards are designed to cover include planning for improved environmental conditions and increased institutional resiliency, examine low energy alternatives to energy intensive climate control systems, analyze existing climate control systems, and evaluate the effectiveness of preventive conservation strategies. The second is an implementation award for up to $350,000, and these can take up to 5 years to complete. Examples of such activities that these awards are designed to cover include manage temperature and relative humidity by passive non-mechanical methods, install or recommission HVAC systems, improve security and the protection of collections from fire, flood, and other disasters, or upgrade lighting systems and controls to achieve energy efficiency. In 2017, the William R. and Norma B. Harvey Library at Hampton University received a Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections Award for their project, Wade in the Water, the Preservation Environmental Plan for the Peabody Collection. The project included site visits, meetings, and conference calls between preservation consultants and local stakeholders. The consultants helped the library to narrow down the strategic options and to select a realistic and achievable strategy and for future improvements for preservations of this important collection. And now I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to talk a little bit about the Office of Challenge Programs.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm John Cox, Program Officer in the Office of Challenge Programs. The Office of Challenge Programs seeks to support the humanities in the long term. So we offer grants to strengthen the institutional base, the infrastructure that undergirds all types of humanities work. Challenge grants don't typically fund short term projects, those that pay for particular types of programming. Instead, Challenge might, for instance, fund the renovation of the building in which those humanities programs take place. The other distinctive feature of challenge grants is that they are matching rather than outright awards. So successful applicants are required to raise money in order to receive the NEH funding. The idea here is that NEH funds will help institutions fundraise for these projects, that federal funding will stimulate additional private, state, and local funding. For many institutions, the standard match for a challenge grant is either 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, depending on the size of the award. But NEH offers certain types of institutions, notably HBCUs, a special 1-to-1 match. So if an HBCU receives a $500,000 challenge grant, it would be required to raise an additional $500,000 in non-federal funds. Challenge Programs currently offers just one program, Infrastructure and Capacity Building Challenge Grants, which aim to help institutions secure long-term support for core activities and expand efforts to preserve and create access to outstanding humanities materials. The ICB program supports two distinct types of projects, capital projects and digital projects, each with its own notice of funding opportunity. Capital projects is the bricks and mortar part of Challenge and supports the design, purchase, construction, restoration, or renovation of facilities for humanities activities. This includes the purchase and installation of related equipment for exhibiting, maintaining, monitoring, and protecting collections, whether on exhibit or in storage, and for critical building systems such as electrical, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, security, life safety, lighting, utilities, telecommunications, and energy management. Projects might include purchase or construction of a new building, renovation of a gallery space, build out of a humanities center within a larger building, or renovation of an existing historic house, site, or landscape. Let me give you a few examples. So, for instance, perhaps your college has a humanities center, but that center doesn't have a dedicated physical space on campus. You might apply to challenge programs to convert an existing building or a space within a building into a new humanities center. Perhaps your main library is being expanded to secure important institutional archives and create a new space for researchers and students working in special collections. As part of a larger reimagining of the full library, you might apply to challenge for one portion of that project. Perhaps your college's oldest building on campus is being renovated and will be used for humanities faculty office space and classrooms, specifically for humanities classes and related activities. Again, Challenge could help fund the full renovation or cover one particular part of that project, the electrical work, the new roof, or the technology and build out of smart classrooms, for instance. Digital infrastructure grants, on the other hand, support the maintenance, modernization, and sustainability of already existing digital scholarly projects and platforms. Some examples of a few eligible activities would be the development and modernization of a digital architecture. That is, you might pay developers to rewrite your software, improvements to data management, updating and enhancing the existing content, digital preservation, so changing data formats, converting data formats to conform to preservation standards, or training and outreach activities. So teaching more people to use your system, but again, there should already be an established audience for existing digital scholarly projects. Before I move on, I'd like to also mention the HBCU Library Alliance, which was awarded a challenge grant of $365,000, matched with another $365,000 in non-federal third-party funds. Building capacity for humanities special collections at HBCUs is a 5-year project to enhance the long-term preservation and conservation of collections at member institutions. The HBCU Library Alliance will offer its member libraries a menu of preservation planning documents, collection surveys, treatment and rehousing services, and educational programs. By helping them to move forward in achieving collection care goals, the Alliance will assist libraries in building capacity for fundraising for special collection initiatives, documenting cultural heritage materials, increasing accessibility of special collection items, and promoting the humanities significance of their collections. Additional details can be found at the website listed there, hbculibraries.org. As you consider putting together an NEH grant proposal for challenge programs or in any other division, it's important to involve a range of project staff, including humanities experts, your college's administrators, grants administrators, building and facilities staff, fundraisers, etc. This is true for all applications to NEH, of course, but it's particularly important for large infrastructure projects such as those we're discussing today. A detailed explanation of review criteria is found in each notice of funding opportunity, but I want to spend a few minutes focusing on a few key areas that staff and reviewers look for in challenge applications and others that we would like you to consider as you're planning your project. The first thing we want to make sure that you're considering as you develop your project is the humanities significance of your project. We are the National Endowment for the Humanities, and so the humanities focus of your project should be front and center in your application. This is generally the first evaluation criteria on every NEH grant, and it's certainly the one that panelists typically spend the most time discussing. Our applications ask for a lot of technical information and details about building plans, collections, workflow, all sorts of different things. But in all of that detail, don't forget to tell the story of your collections or your programs as you discuss the humanities significance. Second important consideration as you're planning your project is the scope of your project. For some projects, NEH funding plus your match will cover the entire cost of your project. So perhaps you're applying to renovate the house pictured here. You'd perhaps request $500,000 from NEH, raise another $500,000 in non-federal funds, and that $1 million would cover the cost of the entire project. On the other hand, many projects are much larger. You may have a $20 to $30 million building project in mind. As you're thinking about applying to NEH, consider what specific activities are going to be supported through either the NEH outright funds, if you're applying to preservation and access, or the NEH matching funds, and the funds that you raise if you're applying to challenge. Challenge grants have a maximum of matching of $750,000. So if you're asking a challenge for $750,000 with a one-to-one match, what part of your larger project is that $1.5 million going to cover, and how are you going to present that as part of your larger project in the application? A third important consideration is the timeline. NEH always asks for a work plan as part of the application package, and we'll look to see if the dates on the work plan, your budget, and the period of performance all align. Are you fundraising at the right time in order to be able to start your project when you say? Have you allowed for sufficient time for fundraising, for planning, and particularly for compliance with federal, state, or local regulations? Challenge grants require two distinct but overlapping timelines. The first is the fundraising timeline. This is the period during which applicants can raise and certify funds in order to receive the NEH matching funds. This timeline begins 5 months prior to the application deadline. So there's an upcoming September 28th deadline in the Office of Challenge Programs. So monies that you raised in May or June of this year could be considered towards that match. So that fundraising may have begun earlier. The second timeline is the period of performance, which is when the project activities themselves will occur. For this round of challenge grants, the period of performance cannot start earlier than July 1, 2022, and will extend no longer than 5 years. Your work plan, your fundraising schedule, and the period of performance, again, should all align and reflect the time necessary to complete all the activities. Regardless of which NEH program you apply to, you'll always want to clarify what work has happened prior to the application deadline, what will happen during the NEH award period, and what work will remain once that award period has ended. If your capital project proposes construction, renovation, repair, rehabilitation, ground or visual disturbance, NEH is required to determine if the project is subject to review under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. If subject to a review, it may take from a few months to a year, and NEH will assist you with the process after an offer of support is made. So be sure to account for this as you consider your project timeline. And again, as Molly said, and as I will repeat a few times, be sure to check with us and don't hesitate to ask us questions if you need more information about Section 106 or any other aspect of the application. The final important consideration specifically related to challenge grants that you need to make sure you have in your application is to tell us about your fundraising capacity. Your college or university likely has a development office that's been doing this work for a long time. Is this a priority for your development office? How are they going to support this particular project with a number of other institutional goals going on? Think about what types of gifts you may be getting. Remember, the gifts, in order to be allowable, must be third-party contributions. We have an entire administration of challenge grants guidance that's available on our website to help you determine what gifts may or may not be eligible. And again, of course, we're happy to have conversations with you about fundraising and what's allowable. These are the major components you'll need to create and assemble your application. A full listing of all materials appears in each notice of funding opportunity. Some are standard forms, but for many of them, you'll prepare a document and ultimately save it as a PDF for uploading into grants.gov. Please follow the formatting requirements and naming conventions very carefully. We're required if a narrative, for instance, is 10 pages and it should be 8, we're not allowed to review it. So make sure that you adhere to the guidelines. The narrative provides a comprehensive framework and description of all aspects of the proposed project. It should be succinct, self-explanatory, and well-organized. That's where you're going to lay out exactly what you're doing. You're going to tell us about humanities significance. You're going to tell us about your project. In challenge, you're also going to tell us about your fundraising. And you're going to do it all, if you're applying to challenge programs, within 8 single-space pages. So you have to think very clearly and concisely as you lay out your argument for funding. You will also submit your project budget as well as a budget justification. In your budget justification, please explain why those things are necessary as part of your project and how you came up with those numbers. Again, your budget will also include a proposed match and release schedule for challenge programs. That is, how much you plan to raise the first year, the second year, and so on. For a challenge grant application, your proposed budget should include only those funds you're requesting from NEH and your required match. For larger projects, please designate which part NEH will be supporting. So as I said before, if you're requesting $500,000 from NEH, you have $500,000 match. We'd like to see a budget for $1 million, even if your larger project is above and beyond that amount. Decide which portion of your larger project NEH will be supporting. We're happy to have conversations about that. Your work plan, again, which is a separate attachment, should align with your narrative and budget. It must include a schedule with the anticipated start and finish dates and critical milestones for your project. Capital projects also include additional attachments, such as planning and design documents, as well as a site description. And digital projects must include a data management and sustainability plan. NEH applications are complicated proposals, so we have some resources online to help you through the process. On each of NEH's program resources page, you'll find the notice of funding opportunity and challenge for both capital projects and digital infrastructure. You'll also find frequently asked questions document that will perhaps answer some of the questions you might have about submission and some other details. Perhaps most importantly, you'll find sample application narratives. These samples, in particular, can be helpful to see what successful applicants have done in the past and how they've constructed their project and their argument for funding. Keep in mind that programs do change the application requirements year to year, so these sample narratives from past years might not match precisely this year's requirements. So be sure, again, to read the notice of funding opportunity. Still, I think they're very helpful for thinking about how you may propose your project and communicate it to NEH and our reviewers. I should also note that the program resource page always includes information on how to get in touch with NEH staff, so be sure to take advantage of that. Again, part of our job is to make sure that we help you put together the most competitive application you can. Applications for NEH grants, like many federal grants, are submitted through a web portal called grants.gov. It's fairly smooth, but it's good for you to spend some time getting familiar with it before you submit your application. We strongly encourage you to apply early, as it gets pretty overwhelmed in the 5 minutes just before the midnight deadline. If your institution has a grants office, they can help. They do this a lot. Grants.gov support is available 24/7. So do your grants.gov registration early, submit early, and ensure that you have a confirmation email from grants.gov. Check your file formats and make sure that the file is in PDF and not doc or something. You can resubmit your application again up to the deadline, but no materials can be added after the deadline, including letters of recommendation or parts of the package that are formatted incorrectly. So submit your application early and confirm that submission if you can. I want to touch on the review criteria that our panelists use to evaluate applications. These are included again in each NOFO, and you'll see that sections of the narrative generally correspond to these criteria. The criteria listed here are those for the Infrastructure and Capacity Building Challenge Grant Program. Each program has its own criteria, though there are many areas of overlap among all of the various NEH programs. To the best of your ability, to be sure to clearly include each one of these elements in your application. You can even use these criteria as subject headings in your narrative. So if you've assembled and submitted your application, now what? All applications for NEH grants go through a lengthy review process, which has several stages. The first step is NEH staff will review your application for eligibility and completeness. We'll make sure that all of the required forms are there and that you are an eligible organization. The next step, and it's central to the work that we do at NEH, is the peer review panel. During this peer review process, evaluators read the applications, write comments, and provide a rating. Then they meet to discuss the applications, virtually these days, and provide feedback and comments to NEH staff. NEH staff review those evaluations, and then we make our funding recommendation. Those recommendations are considered by the National Council on the Humanities, which includes 26 people, scholars in the humanities, that are nominated by the President and approved by the Senate. The Council then makes its own recommendations to the endowment's chairman, who takes all of this into consideration and then makes the decision on which applications to fund. It's a long process, but it allows for rich review. It may help explain why it takes about a year between when your application is submitted and when you're going to hear the results of the competition. But after grants are announced, you can request comments from your evaluators. And if the proposal is not funded, the reviewers' comments can help you think about how to revise your proposal for next time. I'd like to wrap up with just a few quick tips and reminders. One, reach out to a program officer early with a short description of your project. For phone consultations with NEH staff, it's helpful to have both the project director and other staff, project staff, on the call. Carefully read the materials on our website on the notice of funding opportunity, the FAQ, the sample narratives, sample work plans. This material is dense, but it's helpful. Pay attention to file names, budget conventions, those sorts of things. Involve all the project participants in the application draft. If you work with a grant writer, be sure that they're talking to your engineers or digital specialists or fundraisers. Use NEH's search feature to find other institutions that may have already received a grant in the program to which you're applying, and reach out to them for feedback or advice. Send a draft in for comments. These are optional, but applicants have reported that the review and the comments by NEH staff can be very helpful as they're revising and submitting their application. And then finally, whether you're successful or not, please request panelist comments and set up a time to talk with the program officer about your application and how you might review it. I'll say one more time, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, either by phone or email. Here is, and on the last slide, sorry, here's our contact information. Thanks for joining us, and we can move to answering questions now. So I guess if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we can answer it either um, typed or um, verbally. Here, I'll address a question that was already asked. Can you apply for more than one grant to address several needs? And I would say for large projects, it's a very good idea to figure out which part of each project is eligible for which division at NEH. And so you could apply to the Office of Challenge Grants for a building project. You could apply then to preservation and access to preserve particular materials. You could then later apply to the Division of Education to host educational programming or do faculty development workshops on campus. So it's a good idea, I think, to parse out the different parts of a project and apply to various components or divisions at NEH at the same time. It's careful, though, that you don't include any overlapping costs. So you can't apply for the same activity to two different in two different applications.
And I just want there's a question that came through about Hurricane Ida and applying for preservation and preservation assistance grants for emergency relief, and that's absolutely something that we would be looking for in this round, in this next round that's coming up due in January, I believe. So the timing actually is kind of perfect. Please feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions. The preservation assistant grant application is fairly modest, and we do have special, just to say it's not, the narrative is not particularly long. And we do have special incentives for disaster relief. So we're very happy to discuss possible projects. That's exactly the kind of thing that we'd like to be able to help with.
And I would say that's another time you might contact your state humanities council as well. So they may have it as well. NEH is the National Endowment for the Humanities. And then the typical PIs on these grants, it can vary. It's often institutional administrators. It can be humanities scholars and faculty. It might be librarians or archivists. Sometimes for challenge grants, it's a fundraiser. The important thing I would say is that the project director is the person who's sort of solely or primarily responsible for the project. But again, it's important to have a good team to make sure you have the different various voices that you need. The match requirement often limits what some schools can apply. Have you discussed eliminating? Unfortunately, challenge grants are required by law to offer only matching funds. That's the money that we have. So so our budget requires some kind of match. We do. We try to vary the match according to the kinds of institutions and applications projects that we have, but unfortunately, we're not allowed to just do away with the match for challenge programs.
And just to add to that, because I do think that I've heard, just being out in the field, there's sometimes a misperception that, so challenge grants are just one type of grant that NEH does. And as John explained, those require a match, but that's the only program at NEH that requires a match. So just to clarify that the programs that I was speaking about from the Division of Preservation and Access, there is no match at all.
Right, thank you for that right clarification. I think we can share the slides. We'll figure out how to do that with conference organizers. So while we have a minute or two, one other thing I might mention that could be of interest to this audience is the Division of Education at the National Endowment for the Humanities also has a program called Humanities Initiatives at HBCUs. And I would encourage you to look at that. That's a program that's very flexible in terms of the kinds of humanities activities that it supports. It can support faculty development. It can support the development of a new major or a minor. Any number of activities on campus that you might be seeking support for. we should remind you too that there's another session addressing NEH grants tomorrow morning at 9:30, where Division of Education Programs Program Officer Julia Nguyen will be speaking, demystifying the process, best practices for applying for federal arts, humanities, and culture grants. And I'm certain that she will discuss the humanities initiatives at HBCUs. I believe
And I
that
should add
runs
too
that
that at 1 p.m. tomorrow, I will also be presenting on NEH grants and libraries, archives, and museums, specifically addressing collections needs in libraries, archives, and museums on HBCU campuses. Thinking about sort of what those needs might be and how federal grants have met those needs before and might look to continue to meet those needs in the future. So that's tomorrow at 1.
And in terms of community partners, and are you available to apply? Most NEH grants, maybe all of them at NEH, are open to any U.S. 501c3 organization. So if you're a 501c3, you very well could apply to NEH. So feel free to reach out to us and ask for more information if there's a particular program that you're interested in.
And I would just add to that generally NEH loves partnerships. And so community partnerships and sort of town gown kind of relationships that enhance collections or make an infrastructure project or humanities center more meaningful, both on the campus itself, but also to the larger community that it might serve. So I would say that it's not only possible, but it's often encouraged and can make projects more dynamic and have a larger reach. So,
well, we can stay on if there are other questions. Again, we'll leave our email addresses are there on the slide, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us with more if you have questions or would like more information. The flexible grant for faculty training, yes, that's called the Humanities Initiatives at HBCUs. And it is in the Division of Education Programs at NEH. And actually, if you'd like to email me, I can send you a link, direct link to that program page.
Our colleague Mary Macklin just posted a link to the Humanities Initiatives.
Oh, there it is. Great, thanks. In terms of challenge grants, I don't know about future presentations that we have planned for challenge grants, but if you'd like to email me, I'll let you know if I learn of any. And there may well be some others that I'm not aware of just now. But I would be happy to meet individually with you if there's a particular challenge program or a particular project you have in mind. I think Molly and I can't say enough. Please just feel free to reach out to us and ask questions or describe what you're thinking, no matter how vague your project may be to begin with. We encourage you to reach out and talk to us because we're always happy to help develop in projects. And thank you for that, John. I'd be very happy to come to Tennessee State University. I'm from Knoxville, so you're just down there. You're not too far from where I grew up. Although, unfortunately, NEH staff are not traveling these days, although we will begin again at some point.
It's a really interesting question that just came through about preserving and archiving theses as the institution transitions from Mr. Dennis. I think that probably the humanities collections and reference resources, which I will go ahead and post a link to in the chat, is probably the best bet for that. And I'd be very, very happy to speak through, to you to kind of think through some of those how to frame that, because I think it would be very important to frame it correctly. But Humanities Collections and Reference Resources is a Division of Preservation and Access grant. It's our largest grant program, and it's exactly for the preservation, cataloging, and often digitization of collections. So I think it would probably be a really good fit. But please feel free to reach out to me and be happy to think through that more with you. And I'm posting a link to that in the chat right now.
And our colleague Fred Winter has posted an important consideration or reminder, and that is you are welcome to call and talk with NEH staff all you like, and that has no bearing on the evaluation of your application whatsoever. And so, yeah, so our job is to help you put together competitive to help you improve your application, and then once it goes in, then it's reviewed by the evaluation by the panel, and we don't talk about the assistance we've given or anything like that. So please, again, don't worry about any potential impact on consultations with us. We're very happy to assist. I don't know of any NEH program that assists tuition. And in fact, I know certain programs like the Humanities Initiatives program that I mentioned before specifically does not allow for tuition assistance. So I suspect that NEH grants cannot or generally would not cover tuition assistance.
The only caveat that I might add there, but I'm not quite sure, again, it sort of depends upon the particulars of the circumstances, but we do have education and training grants, specifically in the fields of preservation and access. They do not, so the tuition assistance does not go to, oh, that's okay. I just saw someone apologizing, but they don't go to specific people. Instead, they go again to degree granting institutions that help to that help support programs. So, for example, the Moving Image Archive program at NYU has received this grant, and then that assists students and their it helps with internships, fellowships, and as well as just the training that happens in those programs. So I'm not sure that it directly addresses the question about tuition, but it is one way in which we are involved in training and education. And again, strictly within the field of preservation and access.
And I should note too, there are several projects, again, in the Division of Education, where part of the budget, sorry, my phone. Part of the budget could pay for graduate stipends, for instance. So you could pay a graduate student to work on a project. So that's not quite tuition assistance, but it could help support students who are doing the work of the project. And I believe that this session will be posted somewhere, but I'm not sure precisely where. But we'll figure out where it's going to be posted, so you can get in touch with us if you need to. And again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Please reach out to us if you have questions about our programs, or if there's anything at NEH that you would like information about. I think Molly and I both are more than happy to direct you to the right person if we're not the ones to answer your question.
Very happy to do so, and thank you again so much for attending this session with us today. And I'm putting our email addresses in the chat as someone asked us to. Have a great afternoon, everybody.